1935, Morocco. A doctor built a child from his dead patients. The Fez surgical records. The old city of Fez was a maze of stone walls and narrow passageways. By 1935, its air was thick with incense, horse sweat, and the sound of iron shutters clanging closed at dusk. Lanterns burned low in the alleys, their glow swallowed by the shadows of towering minarets. Yet beneath the call to prayer, there was another sound, one the people of Fez never spoke about. It was the silence after a child disappeared. At first, it was one boy, a frail child who vanished after fever struck his lungs. His family believed he had been taken to the hospital by a well-meaning French officer. Then it was a girl, only 7, carried away on a stretcher wrapped in linen. The families grieved, yet whispers spread quickly. Something was wrong at the European hospital. Bodies were not being returned. Graves were left unmarked. Mothers cried at night, clawing at doors that would never open again. The silence became unbearable. The French-controlled hospital sat just outside the Medina walls, its white plaster walls sharp against the dust-colored city. Locals called it a place of healing, but others, more quietly, called it a place of vanishing. Inside, one doctor worked later than the others. His lamp stayed lit long after midnight. Through the shutters, neighbors swore they heard scraping sounds, metal tools on bone, and the slow echo of footsteps pacing the tiled floors. And sometimes even screams. Yet when morning came, the screams had vanished with the night. People tried to ignore it at first. Colonial Morocco was already a land of tension, where silence often meant survival. But the pattern became impossible to dismiss. Children taken in for illness were never seen again. Their families were told that they had passed quickly, that no remains could be released due to medical necessity. Few dared question the French doctors, but everyone in the Medina felt the same cold dread settle over the streets. It was as though the hospital had become a mouth, swallowing children whole. And in the heart of this fear was one name, Dr. Henri Delacroix. Dr. Delacroix was young, brilliant, and unervingly calm. He had trained in Paris before coming to Morocco, where his skill earned him both respect and suspicion. Patients who entered his care either healed miraculously or vanished into the dark. Records were kept, but the ledgers were locked in his private office. Nurses whispered of strange procedures, of bodies open not for healing, but for something else, something forbidden. Rumors spread that he was collecting pieces, hearts, lungs, skin, bones. Some said he was preparing for war. Others said he was chasing immortality. But in the poorest quarters of Fez, mothers whispered a darker truth. He was building a child. By late 1935, the city was suffocating under its own unease. The Medina gates closed earlier than usual. Families barred their doors and windows. Fathers walked their children to school with knives hidden under their jalabas. The haunting suspicion became a part of daily life, woven into every whispered prayer and every glance at the hospital gates. But nothing prepared them for what came next, because inside that white-walled hospital, behind shuttered windows, the doctor was writing something down. Page after page of surgical notes, each one colder than the last. His handwriting, careful and neat, described procedures not meant for the living. And those notes, later discovered by chance, would become known as the Fez surgical records. The name Henri Delacroix carried weight in the corridors of colonial Morocco. To the French officials, he was a man of science, a surgeon who gave the empire prestige in a land it barely understood. To the local Moroccan families, he was something else entirely. A shadow, a thief of children, a figure who lived longer in whispers than in daylight. He was not like the other doctors. He rarely smiled. He never laughed. He spoke in clipped sentences, as though wasting words was a sin. Yet he always carried a small notebook in his pocket, bound in cracked leather, its pages crowded with fine handwriting. Nurses swore he wrote in it constantly. After surgeries, during meals, even in the stillness of the courtyard when the call to prayer drifted over the rooftops. They wondered, was it a diary? A list of the dead? or something worse? Delacroix had arrived in Fez 3 years earlier. He came with glowing letters from Paris, with credentials stamped by the most respected universities in Europe. The French authorities welcomed him as a symbol of progress, a man who could bring modern science to a city they considered backward. But progress was not what the people of Fez saw. They saw the way he lingered around the children's ward, how he insisted on overseeing even minor illnesses himself, how he dismissed parents from the room, closing the doors behind them. His eyes, pale gray, unblinking, unsettled even the strongest fathers. Some said he saw children not as patients, but as raw material. The first real suspicion came from within the hospital itself. A nurse, a Moroccan woman named Fatima, noticed something strange. After certain operations, the waste buckets were heavier than they should have been. And sometimes when she peeked inside, she found not medical refuse, but things that made her blood run cold. Fragments of bone, small hands with stitches, organs wrapped in cloth. She tried to report it, but French administrators silenced her. They told her she was hysterical, that she misunderstood what she saw. Fatima was transferred to another ward. Within weeks, her family sent her away from Fez entirely. No one ever saw her again. Delacroix grew bolder. The hospital attendants noticed the strange deliveries arriving at night. Crates from Europe, carried off wagons and into his private storeroom. The smell of chemicals leaked into the corridors, sharp, stinging, unnatural. Some believed they were preservatives. Others thought they were poisons. One night, a janitor swore he saw Delacroix carrying something down the hall. Not a crate, not a box, but a child, motionless and pale, stitched from head to chest. The janitor told no one, terrified. Yet he never returned to work. The hospital's silence deepened. Still, there were traces. Patients who survived his scalpel sometimes bore strange marks. Odd incisions in places unrelated to their illness. Long scars along the ribs, missing teeth, unexplained deformities. They told their families the doctor was experimenting, that he was looking for something inside them. And those who didn't survive? Their families received only a piece of paper, a certificate of death, signed by Delacroix, stamped by the French government. No votius. No gravis. Just silence. But it was his notebook that drew the most fear. One evening, a young apprentice caught sight of its open pages. What he saw was not medical notes, not cures, not observations. It was a list, names of children, written with precise dates. Alongside each, cold descriptions, lungs removed intact, eyes preserved in solution, heart strong but malformed. And on the final page, one chilling phrase scrawled larger than the rest, project in font. Near completion, the apprentice fled that night. He never returned to the hospital, and for the rest of his life, he refused to speak of what he saw. But the people of Fez already knew. The doctor had too many secrets, and some of them were no longer buried. It began with the graves. In the crowded cemeteries outside the Medina walls, families of the dead went to mourn, only to find nothing but freshly packed earth. They lowered their heads in prayer, but the soil seemed too light, too hollow. When one grieving father dug into the dirt, what he found was worse than any nightmare. The small coffin was empty. The child had been buried, but not there. Word spread quickly through the alleys of Fez. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Fathers kept knives hidden in their robes. But the truth was unavoidable. Children who entered the hospital often never returned, and even when they did, their bodies had been changed. The missing organs were the first sign. A family received the body of their young daughter. She had died of pneumonia, or so they were told. But when they prepared her for burial, the women washing her body gasped in horror. Her chest was caved in. The stitching along her ribs was clumsy, as though someone had rushed to sew her back together. And inside, nothing. Her lungs were gone. The family buried her quickly, hoping to silence the whispers. But the whispers did not die. Another child was returned in pieces. His limbs had been rearranged, his skin crudely stitched in places where no surgery should have touched him. His mother fainted at the sight. His father tried to bring the body to the authorities, but they refused to look. The French police turned him away, muttering about scientific study and classified work. The people of Fez realized then that no one would help them. The colonizers controlled the hospitals, the courts, the cemeteries. The truth would be buried deeper than the children themselves. But not everyone was willing to stay silent. One night, a group of men crept into the cemetery under moonlight. They carried shovels, lanterns, and prayers whispered through clenched teeth. They dug into the graves of children who had died under Delacroix's care. Each coffin they opened revealed the same horror: empty shells, bodies gutted, organs missing, bones rearranged. It was not disease that had killed these children. It was the doctor. The men sealed the coffins again, trembling, and swore an oath to never speak of it publicly. To do so would bring punishment from the French. But they told their families, who told their neighbors, until all of Fez was wrapped in a single suffocating fear. The hospital was no longer a place of healing. It was a butcher's hall. Still, the question burned in everyone's mind. Why? Why steal the organs of the young? Why desecrate the dead? The answers lay hidden in Delacroix's private records. Fragments of his notes, stolen by a nurse before she fled, revealed chilling details. He wrote of testing transplants, of finding compatibility, of assembling a viable subject. He was not just harvesting organs. He was trying to build something. The parents of Fez carried this terror with them like a second shadow. They no longer trusted the streets. They no longer trusted the hospital. The city itself felt poisoned. And yet, the disappearances did not stop. In fact, they grew worse. Because for every child returned empty, another was not returned at all. And in the hospital, under flickering lamps and the sharp scent of chemicals, Delacroix's work pushed forward with a single obsession: to create a child who had never been born, built piece by piece from the bodies of the dead. The ledger was never meant to be found. Bound in leather worn smooth by sleepless hands, it carried the weight of 100 stolen lives. Every line was written with the calm precision of a man who believed he was not committing crimes, but history. Yet in the dim wards of the hospital, its existence became an open secret. Nurses whispered of it in the corridors. Janitors swore they saw it lying open on his desk, its ink still wet, names still bleeding. They called it the Ledger of Children. One surviving page would later surface, torn and hidden by trembling hands. It listed 10 names. Each belonged to a child who had entered the hospital and never come home. Alongside their names were words that made even the most hardened men turn pale. Eyes extracted intact, liver preserved in solution, bone marrow tested for resilience. It was not medicine. It was inventory. The people of Fez began to realize what they were up against. This was not the work of a careless surgeon. It was the work of someone cataloging, storing, assembling. Someone who looked at the dead not as children, but as building blocks. The ledger also carried numbers, dates, times, diagrams of procedures sketched in a neat, almost artistic hand. A nurse later whispered that she saw a drawing of a rib cage, not belonging to one child but several, stitched together in impossible ways. Another page carried a note that chilled her blood. Subject nearly viable. Requires stronger heart. It was then the nurse knew she had to act. Late one night, she crept into Delacroix's office. The door was unlocked, as though daring her to enter. The lamp was still burning, casting long shadows across the walls. On the desk lay the ledger, open to a page covered in ink. She tore it out, her hands shaking, and stuffed it into her apron. But as she turned, she froze. In the corner of the room sat a covered shape, a cloth draped over it, too small to be a bed, too large to be a chair. The shape twitched. The nurse ran without looking back. By morning, she was gone. No one knew if she fled the city, or if she was silenced like others before her. But the torn page survived, smuggled into the Medina by hands too afraid to keep it. It was passed from family to family, until everyone in Fez knew the truth. The doctor was building something, and the ledger was his blueprint. But with knowledge came terror. Parents now refused to bring their children to the hospital, even when fever consumed them, even when cholera spread through the narrow streets. They whispered prayers over their sick, preferring death at home to the cold hands of the doctor. The Medina became a city of mourning, but also defiance. Still, Delacroix did not stop. His lamp burned through the night. The ledger grew thicker, page by page. And deep inside those records, one phrase kept repeating, over and over, in neat, merciless handwriting, "The child will live." What the people of Fez did not yet understand was that he was close. Closer than anyone could imagine. Because hidden in a white-walled hospital, in a locked chamber that smelled of formaldehyde and silence, lay the boy no one had ever birthed. A boy assembled from the bones and blood of the dead. It began as a rumor, a whisper too terrible to believe. The doctor was not simply harvesting organs. He was building a child. But in the winter of 1935, that rumor gained flesh. Nurses swore they heard muffled cries echoing from the basement halls long after the wards were quiet. Not the cries of the sick or the dying, but the cries of something struggling to breathe, gasping like a newborn pulled too early into the world. And when those cries stopped, a silence heavier than death fell over the hospital. One attendant claimed he saw it. A boy lying under gaslight, his skin patchworked with stitches, his chest rising and falling with effort not his own. His eyes fluttered but never opened. His limbs jerked as though wires pulled them from beneath the skin. And above him stood Delacroix, watching with a hunger that was not paternal, not medical, but something darker, obsession. The doctor had given him a name, l'enfant reconstruit, the reconstructed child. He wrote about him in his ledger with the pride of a father and the coldness of a scientist. Heart functional, lungs partially viable, neural response uncertain, continuing grafts required. Each word dripped with detachment. This was not a child to him. It was a project. The people of Fez never saw the boy, but they felt his presence. Families living near the hospital spoke of shadows flickering against windows at odd hours, shapes too small to be a grown man, too jerky to be natural. Children whispered of seeing a pale face behind the shutters, watching them from the darkness. One girl swore she saw him in the alley at dawn. A boy with mismatched eyes, one blue and one dark brown, staring at her before vanishing behind the hospital wall. When she told her mother, the woman slapped her face and told her never to repeat such things. But the girl never forgot. The boy was not whole. He was a collage of the dead, stitched together by hands that believed themselves divine. His chest bore scars from more than one rib cage. His legs did not match in length. His skin bore the hues of several children, patched like a quilt. And yet, somehow, he breathed. Delacroix's obsession grew. He wrote of needing a stronger heart, a cleaner liver, purer eyes. Each failed graft meant another child lost, another body emptied. Each success meant the boy stirred closer to life. But life came with consequence. One night, during a storm that rattled the shutters and filled the streets with rain, a scream tore through the hospital. It was not the scream of a patient, nor the wail of a mourning mother. It was sharp, high, inhuman, the scream of something that should not exist. Nurses rushed toward the sound, only to be locked out by heavy doors. Behind them, they heard crashing glass, metal instruments clattering, and Delacroix shouting in French words no one could understand. Then silence. The next morning, the hospital resumed as though nothing had happened. But the ledger told the truth. In crisp handwriting beneath the date, Delacroix had written, "Subject moved. Progress excellent." The boy lived on, hidden from the world. Not quite alive, not quite dead. And the people of Fez began to ask themselves the question no one dared speak aloud. If a child is built from the dead, what kind of soul does he carry? For every stitch on the boy's skin, there was a mother left in silence. The women of Fez carried their grief like stones tied to their hearts. Some still clung to hope that their children lived, trapped somewhere in the white hospital, waiting to be freed. Others knew the truth, but refused to speak it, for words made it too real. They became ghosts in their own homes. Eyes hollow, hands trembling as they kneaded bread, washed clothes, rocked younger children who still breathed. Their prayers grew sharper, their voices hoarse from bargaining with a God who seemed to have turned away. But the worst pain was not death. It was not knowing. One mother, Amina, never forgave herself. Her son, Karim, had been taken to the hospital with a fever. She trusted the French doctor when he said the boy would recover. Days later, she was told Karim was gone, his body unavailable due to complications. She begged to see him. She fell to her knees before the hospital doors. But the guards pushed her away. Every night after, she returned to those doors, pressing her ear to the wood as though she might hear her child calling. She swore she did once, a faint tapping, a muffled cry. But when she screamed for the guards, they dragged her into the street and left her in the dust. She never stopped coming back, and the neighbors said her hair turned white in a single year. Another woman, Lala Zara, received her daughter's body, but what she found broke her mind. The small corpse had stitches running across the chest, the stomach, even the throat. Organs missing, bones rearranged. It was not her daughter anymore, but a hollow shell returned for burial. She refused to bury the child. She kept the body in her home, perfumed with incense, wrapped in silk, rocking it in her arms as though sleep might bring it back. Neighbors avoided her doorway, fearing the stench of grief and the madness it carried. Months later, they found her dead beside the body, her lips pressed to the child's cold forehead. The hospital stole more than lives. It stole futures. The alleys of Fez echoed with the silence of children who would never run through them again. Schools lost students. Homes lost laughter. Weddings were delayed. For who could celebrate when so many mothers dressed in mourning black? The city itself seemed cursed. But grief has a way of hardening into fury. Some women gathered secretly, lighting candles in the corners of their homes, whispering prayers not only for protection, but for vengeance. They told each other stories of the ledger, of the boy assembled from their children's remains. And each mother carried the same question in her chest. If her child's heart still beat somewhere in that hospital, could she ever rest until it was laid to peace? Yet closure never came. The French officials dismissed complaints, silenced witnesses, buried evidence. To the colonial powers, the mothers of Fez were nothing but noise. Their grief was inconvenient, their losses expendable. And so the mothers of Fez wept alone, their tears mixing with the dust of the Medina. But grief never truly dies. It lingers, it poisons, and soon it would demand to be heard. In the corridors of colonial power, silence was often louder than truth. The mothers and fathers of Fez pleaded for justice. They brought scraps of evidence, torn pages from the ledger, bodies with crude stitches, whispered testimonies from nurses who fled in fear. They stood before French administrators in their starched uniforms, begging for answers. But the officials looked past them, eyes cold, voices clipped. Delacroix is a man of science, they said. You are people of superstition. With those words, every door slammed shut. The French authorities knew. They had read his reports. They had seen his experiments written in the precise language of medicine, cloaked in terms of progress and innovation. They called it necessary research, a sacrifice for the advancement of European science. To them, the Moroccan children were not citizens. They were subjects, bodies, data. Delacroix was not a criminal in their eyes. He was an asset. In private, whispers flowed differently. Some officers admitted unease when they passed the hospital at night, hearing faint cries through shuttered windows. Others confided that they feared what Delacroix was doing, not because it was immoral, but because it might fail and expose them. Failure was dangerous. But success? Success was useful. The 1930s were a time of war on the horizon, when nations scrambled for power. Stronger bodies, longer life, resistance to disease. If Delacroix's work could create such things, France would not bury it. They would shield it. The people of Fez saw this betrayal clearly. They knew they would find no justice in the courts, no protection from the police. When one father tried to press charges after his daughter's body was returned mutilated, he was arrested instead, accused of inciting unrest. His wife was left to bury their child alone. Another family attempted to storm the hospital gates in the dead of night, armed with knives and stones. The French soldiers waiting outside fired shots into the air, scattering them like insects. By morning, the family had vanished from the Medina. Some said they fled to the mountains. Others believed they were buried in unmarked graves. The message was clear. The doctor was untouchable. Inside the hospital, Delacroix continued his work undisturbed. He dined with officers, drank French wine, and spoke of progress in the colonies. To their ears, it was the language of empire. To the people of Fez, it was the language of death. The mothers kept weeping. The fathers kept sharpening their knives. But the power lay elsewhere, in marble offices guarded by foreign guns. And so the city split in two. On one side, a hospital glowing with electric light, backed by the full force of the French Empire. On the other, a Medina sinking into grief, families bound together by silence and loss. The children of Fez were disappearing into the white walls of science, and the world beyond Morocco refused to see. By 1936, Fez had become a city where grief clung to the air like incense. The narrow streets seemed darker, the markets quieter, the laughter of children nearly gone. Mothers walked with their heads bowed, eyes darting toward the hospital that loomed like a specter on the city's edge. Its whitewashed walls no longer promised healing. They promised silence. People said the hospital breathed at night. Thin smoke curled from its chimneys long after the lamps of the Medina had burned out. Shadows flickered against shuttered windows, not shaped like doctors or nurses, but smaller, broken, unnatural. Children told stories in hushed voices, daring each other to walk past the gates after sunset. They spoke of seeing pale faces staring from the windows. Some swore they heard whispers in French and Arabic, voices layered like echoes, as though too many mouths spoke from one throat. The adults told them to be silent, but they feared the stories were true. The markets buzzed with rumors. A butcher claimed he saw a crate of ice delivered to the hospital. Inside it's something that looked like a child's arm. A washerwoman swore she saw blood seeping through the hospital's drains, mixing with rainwater that ran down the cobblestones. A beggar near the gate told anyone who would listen that he heard a child calling from inside the walls, "Help me! Help me!" in a voice that did not sound fully human. The people tried to dismiss these tales as madness, but in their hearts they believed. At night, the city seemed alive with dread. Fathers stayed awake with knives beside their beds. Mothers pressed their children between them, whispering prayers until dawn. And yet, the fear was not just of losing their children. It was of something returning to them changed. One family reported seeing a figure in their courtyard, small, hunched, with skin pale as candle wax and eyes that glowed in the moonlight. When they shouted, it leapt the wall and vanished into the alleys. They left their home the next morning and never returned. Another woman claimed she found footprints in the dust outside her door. Not barefoot, not shod, but stitched as though 2 feet had been sewn together. The city grew quieter, as if afraid to draw attention. Weddings were postponed. Festivals passed without celebration. Even the call to prayer seemed thinner, swallowed by the weight of mourning. Fez was becoming a ghost of itself. Still, Delacroix's light burned. Night after night, smoke curled upward, carrying with it the scent of burning flesh, bitter chemicals, and something else the people could not name. The hospital became a lighthouse of dread, glowing while the rest of the city slept in uneasy silence. Some claimed the shadows inside were no longer just his, that he was not alone in that building, that another figure moved with him, small, pale, stitched together, learning to walk. And with each passing day, the city wondered. If the doctor had succeeded in creating a child from the dead, then what lived behind those walls? And worse, what if one night it decided to leave? Most who lay under Delacroix's knife never woke again. But one boy did. His name was Youssef. He was 10 years old when fever gripped his body and his father, desperate, carried him to the White Hospital. They believed perhaps luck would favor them, that the stories were only rumors. Instead, Youssef was led into the same cold chamber where so many had vanished. He remembered the gaslight above him, the sharp sting of chloroform, the doctor's pale face leaning close, whispering in French words he could not understand. Then the darkness swallowed him whole. But the darkness did not keep him. When Youssef awoke, he was no longer the same. His chest ached as though fire lived inside it. Stitches pulled at his ribs. His throat burned when he tried to speak. He opened his eyes to see Delacroix standing over him, writing in the ledger. Subject stable. Transplant successful. The doctor did not look at him as a child. He looked at him as a specimen that had survived the experiment. Youssef wanted to scream, but his voice broke into nothing. He drifted in and out of consciousness for days. In the haze of pain, he heard sounds that haunted him for the rest of his life. A faint cry from the next room, a child's cry, but jagged, wrong, as if two voices spoke through one mouth. The sound of dragging footsteps, slow and uneven, as though learning to walk. And sometimes, in the stillness of night, a whisper too close to his ear, "Brother." One evening, a nurse entered his room. She was Moroccan, her face lined with fear. She pressed her finger to her lips, urging him to stay silent, and then leaned close. "You must leave," she whispered. "He will come for your heart next." She loosened his bandages, gave him a cloak, and guided him through the back corridors of the hospital. The air was thick with the smell of chemicals. The walls echoed with distant scratching, something that did not sound human. Youssef staggered forward, every step agony, until they reached a side door. The nurse shoved him into the night and whispered, "Run." Youssef stumbled through the dark streets of Fez, half dead, half alive. His stitches tore. Blood soaked his cloak. Yet he kept moving, driven by terror. When he finally collapsed at his family's door, his father thought him a ghost returned. His mother screamed, then fell to her knees, kissing his bloodied hands. He survived, but survival was not mercy. For the rest of his life, Youssef carried the scars. His chest bore the mark of another child's heart beating within him. His sleep was broken by whispers, by dreams of pale, stitched faces. Sometimes he swore he felt another rhythm beneath his skin, as though two lives pulsed within one body. And he carried a memory that he never told anyone until he was an old man. That final night, as the nurse pushed him through the door, he glanced back. Through the crack of light in the corridor, he saw the boy, the one assembled from the dead. The boy was standing, watching, his mismatched eyes gleaming in the dark. And in that instant, Youssef knew the doctor's creation was alive. In the spring of 1936, the hospital gates were found open. The lamps were still burning, the ledgers scattered across the floor, surgical tools left glistening with fresh blood. But the doctor was gone. Henri Delacroix had vanished. Some said he fled to Casablanca under the cover of night, carried in a French officer's car, protected by the very men who once praised his research. Others whispered he was killed in secret, buried in an unmarked grave by those who could no longer tolerate his crimes. But in the Medina, the most chilling story spread, that he had not left alone, that he had taken a boy with him. The French authorities offered no answers. They declared the hospital under review, then quietly shut it down. The building stood empty for months, its walls cracking, its windows boarded. Children avoided it, throwing stones at the gates but never daring to enter. Eventually, it was abandoned completely, left to rot under the Moroccan sun. But the people of Fez knew abandonment was not the same as closure. The ledgers were never fully recovered. A few torn pages surfaced years later, smuggled into private collections, then locked away. They spoke of subject viable, of further refinement abroad. The handwriting was unmistakable, Delacroix's neat, deliberate script. The rest disappeared, perhaps destroyed, perhaps carried with him wherever he went. What remained were stories. Mothers still whispered about the cries that once echoed through the hospital walls. Fathers told their sons never to trust the white buildings of foreigners. Children grew up hearing warnings. Don't wander too far, or the doctor will take you and stitch you into his child. The legend of the boy with mismatched eyes haunted Fez long after Delacroix vanished. Some claimed to see him in the mountains, a pale figure watching from the rocks. Others swore he appeared in dreams, whispering in two voices at once. A curse, a shadow, a reminder that some creations can never be buried. As the years passed, war swept across Europe. Whispers emerged that Delacroix resurfaced in Paris, working under another name, his experiments hidden within the chaos of occupied France. Others believed he died nameless, his child left to wander in silence. But in Fez, the truth did not matter. The hospital still stood, rotting and empty, yet no one dared enter. Smoke sometimes curled from its chimney, even after abandonment, though no fire was ever found inside. Footsteps echoed in its halls long after the doors were locked. The people of Fez said it was haunted, not by ghosts, but by the living fragments of children stolen, sewn, and left restless in the dark. And so the city carried its scar, a scar not written in stone, but in memory. Mothers who never healed, fathers who never forgave, a people who learned that silence could be deadlier than screams. The doctor was gone, but his shadow remained. And somewhere, perhaps far from Fez, perhaps closer than anyone dared to believe, a boy assembled from the dead still breathed.